here is how can corporates also now engage with startups so that they can benefit from that activity, innovation, and portion that comes to that. But before we start, I would like us to do a quick introduction of ourselves. I have a very strong panel here of smart people, intellectuals in the corporate space, also working in startups, and allow each one of them to introduce themselves, starting with
thank you, Jeremy. Happy to be here. My name is Ronald Cheng from Corporate. So what we do is that we help households and businesses to create staying power. So that's using finance as a tool to help you to do more of what you really want to do. So once you have set your finances right, then whatever mission and objective that you have, I believe that you have an opportunity to do more of it. Because without finance, then the lifetime of your idea can be cut short.
Thank you. Next.
Thank you. My name is Jacqueline Minza. I work for East Africa Venture Capital Association. It's a network for venture capital and private equity investors who are investing in businesses across East Africa, and our job is to support and catalyze investments into these businesses through advocacy, influencing policy to ensure that the business environment is investor friendly, and so the environment is also business friendly to the startups, and also providing a lot of capacity building and training, network facilitation, so connecting businesses to capital opportunities or strategic partnerships. And beyond that, also just providing insights and market report intelligence in terms of what's influencing the investment in the region, the trends, and how can we collaboratively work towards achieving the economic development and growth in the region.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Solomon Kelao. I work for KPMG. Mostly work for audit, tax, and advisory. But we also support startups, SMEs, and family businesses through what we call KPMG Credit Enterprise. So just building to what that would say. Through the audit, tax, and advisory offerings that we do have, then we blend that in to support startups, whether they are starting off, whether they're scaling, and whether they come from businesses. And you'll see us partnering a lot with VCs and PEs just to make these large ideas in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And so now I would like us to dive right into our discussion today. So today we have there's a lot of money that I've mentioned here, coincidentally. It's a panel of investors, transaction advisors, financial advisors, but they're intellectually capable also to discuss the topic of startup corporate partnerships. So I would just like to throw it to my panelists. How are you seeing the current state of affairs in terms of startups and corporates? Are they collaborating? Are they working together? Or do we have like a big divide and people not understanding each other? There's also another perspective of startups coming to cannibalize the corporates and whatever the corporates are doing due to their operations, sensitivity, and ability to make things move fast. Or we see kind of cooperation, zero cannibalization. What's happening within our Kenyan context? It's Innovate Kenya, so what's happening within the Kenyan context for that relationship between startups and corporates? Anyone?
Maybe I can start. So it's a very good question that you ask, and especially the point around startups cannibalizing what corporates are doing. I think that is the biggest killer of dreams for startups, because it's a misconception if you ask me, to be quite honest. What I would say is, from my perspective, I see it as more of startups complementing and even helping these corporates to be able to innovate, to adapt, and to keep up with the changing, even consumer demands. But when you look at it, also in terms of partnerships and cooperations happening, I haven't seen many success cases of corporate startup partnerships, and that is majorly driven by the issue around this misperception around you're having to take over what we are doing, and so what can we do to ensure that you're blocked out, so you put up so many red tapes for these startups, and that is also partly influenced by cultural misalignment between the startups and the corporates. So you look at corporates having been very well established in their traditional systems. There's a lot of bureaucracy in their decision making is slow. But when these startups are coming in, they're very motivated, entrepreneurial focused individuals who are, they move with agility, with speed and all that. And so you tend to find that there's that cultural misalignment on that aspect. The corporates have different risk appetites to what these startups have to offer. Also, when you look at the notion around these startups having trust issues when it comes to the IP, I think, they wouldn't be very comfortable to approach some corporate partnerships. And we've had some cases where startups feel like once they get into, or they try to get into these corporate partnerships, then their business is taken over and they lose control. And that is something they are also not willing to, let go of. However, there's been a few cases of startups who, for example, have tried to do it on their own, and then they tried to fundraise and did not, were not successful at the time, because now when you're fundraising, you're mostly approaching the more commercially oriented type of investors who want to see that you have, proven market traction and ability to scale and all that. And so when you're not ready, according to these investors, they turn you away. So I know of one startup that, decided when they were facing hurdles with fundraising, let's approach it in a different way. Let's start having corporate partnerships. And they've been able to do really well with this sort of model where they have corporate partnerships, and now that has helped them to get to profitability in terms of revenue generation, to sustain themselves. And now as they approach investors, they are now considered as one of the opportunities that investors would not want to miss out on. But it has taken a lot of iterations in terms of their business model, in terms of who you approach for partnerships, and you have to be very strategic around it. But that is just one of the cases, and I wouldn't say it's come without its hurdles. Yeah. So I think in Kenya specifically, there's a huge potential for corporates and startups to work together, but the differences around thinking, misalignment in terms of priorities and strategies are some of the things that need a lot of effort and collaboration from the ecosystem widely to be able to drive some cohesion and alignment and sort of now foster this kind of partnerships.
Thank you, Jackie. I think you just did a very good background and context. You created a very good picture of the challenges that are in there, what will be done, and how it can be done. I'd like to hear from Roberts. From where he sits, building up on what Jackie shared, and I think for Jackie, I'll come back to you from that point of fundraising and those strategic partnerships and how you have the process to see that. But back to Roberts. How are you seeing the power here between the corporates and the startups? Corporates becoming older and aged and analog, whereas startups are coming and putting up the space, or are you seeing more of collaboration?
That's a very interesting question. So I think it's good to start with my own story. So back in 2015, I had a startup idea, it was called Bangaiza. So with Bangaiza, yeah. So what you are doing is to say that, because before then what people will do, let's say you want to have some workers that you want to pay in shares. What you do, once you've been paid, you've gotten your salary, you go to the team, you draw the money, right? Then you go to an investor agent, you deposit the money, then you send. So we wanted to cut that process and say, why can't you have standing instructions from your bank directly to the investor? So I went to Hub, and we're actually number 6 out of the 50 startups that are there. And to implement the idea in my mind, what I had back then was that I would have maybe Safaricom cases. And looking back, what I can say, I didn't have the resourcefulness back then to be able to achieve that, to approach the two. So from there, my idea was that going forward, no corporates will ever stop my idea. So I said, let me now go to where I day. And that's how we started our journey. We started building community where we could have customers who are paying us directly. So it worked the other way around because now corporates started approaching us. Yeah, so it worked close to all time moments. Some of the top asset management companies, insurance, you normally see them coming to our conference. So I think now what we need to look at, you should have something to offer and should be a compelling value. Then take your time and study the other person. Like I read the annual reports of all these companies to understand the strategies where they're going. So when you start telling me that you can't talk to each other, then clearly there's a problem. So you need to get better at conversation. Yeah, so that's one angle. Just see what you can do. Be resourceful and have angles where you can find something working. Because that's what entrepreneurialism is all about. That you are trying to figure out things. Yeah. So you have no room or excuses to blame anyone. Because those who have figured out things are the ones who are successful. Yeah. So I always believe how to figure it out, look at different angles. If I have a community like 90K people, and some of them can pay for my masterclass, 350 can pay for my conference, it is much easier to tell a corporate now come here. And when the corporates come, they learn from the real people on the ground. They realize that we have gaps. We sit in there, ivory towers, and you don't know what is happening on the ground. So then they'll come back and say, wow, I love those conversations and I like more sites because they're actually driving how we're building some of our products. So can we continue having them? So offer something is number one. Then number two, the challenge that we have now in Africa is that our stories are not captured and told. And because of NDA, people have been in banking, cannot talk. But you know, startups that we are literally the people who can them to succeed. But when they're out here, they bash up and say, they are like close to all payment fintechs. They are powered by these incumbents. There's some that we even handheld across Africa. Those stories are true and they are not captured and they are really diluting our heritage. Yeah, because if you look at even some stories that are in the public, like literally, Safaricom handheld them what I call handshake, right? It is in the public domain how it started, very successful. Companies like cellular partnership, Ecobank, those are some of the most successful startups. Crack Silicon, the same with bank circles. Yes, as I think that's where we're losing it when we don't capture our heritage. Then now stories just come from all over. Because if you ask us some of the most successful startups in Kenya, the companies like Innovate, the companies like Cellular, Crack Silicon, who else? Jambo Pay. We know the histories. They started through partnerships with the companies. Yes, I think what we need to do is capture the history and see now what has worked and how can build it better. And personally, since I analyze all banks, I know banks that are most approachable to startups. And I've actually recommended 4 startups and 3 of them have got an opportunity. A bank like GTB, they are very open, and they actually have that space, GTBX, and you could see startups like Voya coming out of there. I've seen possessions, question of the child. Yeah, so the more conversations we have, in my opinion, these are the people you went to school with, high school in Korea. They're the ones that Safaricom is just a name. Yeah. So I would really say let's get better at conversations. I know we got into this 8 to 5 thing, we're always busy, meeting should be 20 minutes. Some of the best meetings that I've had, like there's someone I met at Social House, it was sort of class mentorship. It was supposed to go for 1 hour, but it spent half a day. But it ended up building a product for us, their idea as a mentor and mentee relationship. That product gave us like 25% of our revenue because that is great. So sometimes by being too busy, we start calling each other in because we don't have the time to have conversation. So the easy option is to call each other in. So say, number 1, offer something. Then number 2, let's capture and see what has worked, what can we learn from it, and capture these stories so that people can actually see the successes. Because you get ahead by building on the successes, not talking about what is not working.
Great, thank you. So we need to offer value to the startups so that the corporates can find value collaborating with us. And number two, we need to capture our stories. And what has worked, because like you're saying, the incumbents have been part of the success of the startups that flourished. They're not just flourished, they're startups. So I'd like to bring in Solomon on that note. Solomon sits in a vantage point where they consult for the corporates as to our capability. But now there's also the private segment now goes into startups and smaller businesses. How do you see the dichotomy in terms of the culture, mindset of the C-suite guys in corporates when you're talking to them and how they see growth and strategic planning at their level in innovation, and when you're dealing now with the enterprises, the startups on the enterprise side, how do you see their culture, their mindset, their thinking, and because you have the advantage of seeing both and talking to both, where do you see points of intersection?
Okay, thank you for that question. So, in terms of culture, one side we see agility in the side of startups. On more established corporates, we see structure, and ability to So, on one side, we more we need to take a step. This other side, we want to be more discussed because maybe this identification of the project is a style I have when going business. Maybe I'm that type of person to grow the business organically, so I'm not really looking too much into people. Maybe there are those corporates that can take more risk or build a certain structure and do more acquisitions. In terms of our bird's eye view of how different startups are from corporate, for a startup, of course, their primary objective is to grow the business. And therefore, yes, I may be required to take more risk, and compliance becomes potential gap, which you do not see in this other side. For maybe more established corporates, they want to understand the compliance first before taking that jump into committing for certain idea or not. Now, over the last 1 or 2 years, my experience with startups specifically is that they're really focused on growing the business, but you're also seeing a shift where VCs, PEs, and even corporates are saying, hey, look, we understand that you have a business to grow, but you also need to think of the future. At that point, you have to exit. You have to exit a company that has so many problems that loses its value from the get-go. But do I want to get compliance right from the get-go, such that by the time an exit is on the horizon, then I can be able to derive as much value as possible. And that is where capability comes in. Remember, I said we offer auditors and advisory. There are compliance aspects to it, which we already offered to these corporates. But now, what we also see is that the people investing in startups, be it corporates, be it private equities, be it venture capitalists, and so on and so forth. There's really an increased focus on ensuring that the people they invest in are compliant from the word go. It could be from a governance point of view, section 1 has said, I have the right people sitting on the board that they give me sound advice. From a tax point of view, am I having my affairs in order? You do not want a situation where you really go very well. Then 5 years down the line, can this with massive assessment that what's the level of the business, you don't want that. So that interpretation is very important, and I want to make this link between the corporates and these startups in terms of what are these things that we've seen across the board that these startups and corporates need to know so that, number one, they achieve the strategic objectives, but at the same time, encouraging sustainability for business models.
Great. I think that's a good way to see the dichotomy where there's agility on one side and then there's agility on the other side. And but now also the changing mindsets where the corporates are starting to see there could be something here these startups. But the challenge we are finding is, and I'm speaking from experience we have currently going until one of our startup that we're supporting is, we find for them they are on a day-to-day kind of survival and growth. And part of the program that they're going through with the corporate should also be providing some capital for the development of the solution that is going to be integrated into the corporate's bigger solution that they do. But the corporate guys, they take 3 months to sign that check. The startup needs the money today to pay the developers. After 1 month, the corporate comes to take the KPIs, then the finance officer is someone on a leave. And that kind of brings a friction and a point of kind of conflict where we're supposed to send them money, but they're like, you already have it, you're not getting anything after the whole bureaucracy. So how do we merge these two parties so that the complexity of the corporate bureaucracy does not hinder the speed at which startups need to be working, and we make sure that there's a bit of harmony when these guys are collaborating, because the startups may end up being frustrated most of the time. These guys, yes, we signed a deal in a flashy beautiful boardroom, but we ended up now, after that, it all slows down from the side of the corporate. For them, they picked up holes. Even the money they're giving is so small compared to the budget. How do you now make sure that there's a proper understanding between, and I'll throw this to Robert. You're looking at me as we have an answer. So how do you build that trust? You said you should tell our own story, finding that these companies that have supported our own startups. How do you build that synergy and working relationship where the speed of the startup is aligned with the bureaucracy and the speed of this?
So that's a very good question. So I would say that one is not the corporate side. So usually I say that corporate themselves, since they've done well in the past, but they still need to keep doing well in the future, they need to start experimentation and come up with an innovation culture. So with innovation culture, you separate, you run dual strategies, where when you're defending the code, you go to doing, then the second part exploring the future. So you need to have innovation agents in the company who will now have budgets, and in my opinion, even a startup or an SME should always have money that they're ready to earn. I always tell you the small startup or SME, I would rather you try with some idea on TikTok with 50K. It's okay if it doesn't work. So that's what we call money to earn. It is what has given back to some of the biggest ideas. So when corporates now start thinking that way, then it means you'll have an angle for innovation. So when we're bringing startups, that part of the business needs to have that activity. If you really want the business to work, and then give them maximum support, front load the support. Because the support, like you said, is time of give me the support 3 months from now, it may not be useful. So on that part is the corporate to take time, have some budget, like you can even say 0.5% of our annual budget or revenues are for train companies. So that really means that from that end, you can also support startups and then you grow together. So you should really be like a big brother in this case. So that now you can share things, you have what you work and bear all the risks. Because this budget, that is what is supposed to be used for. So no blame games for the startups. They have the agility and you've already seen something with them. So it's really good to give them that maximum support, which I've received feedback which can be slow, and even as sometimes you work with some corporates, they take forever to pay, but there's some that actually pay 50% upfront. So again, it's just for startups to be aware of the realities of the environment. There's some organizations that operate in a certain way, and you sort of have to do due diligence. They might not change because of you, but they're people who already fit for purpose in terms of what you want.
Right. So I think what we're realizing here is the corporate needs to be able to flexible and allow for speed and also a bit of higher risk taking. And what you're seeing, and this now goes back to Jackie, what you're seeing happening is the corporates wants to do the thing the way they do it. Instead of mentioning that they have their way, they have some reputation to protect, and they need to keep operating normally. They have hundreds of thousands of customers to keep serving on a day as the experimental solution. One of the things that has started coming up with Imagine is they have a separate segment. Previously used to be probably R&D, but now there's a whole new concept around corporate culture that is coming up. Different organizations, corporates are coming up with that whole section, department funded. You keep taking risks. When it works, you can now offload it to be mainstreamed and integrated into our solutions. From where you sit as the boss for VC, yeah, in East Africa, not even in Kenya. But specifically from where you sit, what are you seeing as the evolution happening around the corporate VC space? Because that's also one of the areas where you can see startups and corporates kind of coming together. What's happening in that space? What are the models that are coming up and what's working? What are the initial things that you see in that space?
That's a very good question, and I can say that, with each innovation comes new ideas, new technologies, and we've been for a long time stuck, or we've been sitting in a period where when a startup gets to a point where they now need to, they need some external funding to be able to continue growing and scaling, the first thought would be, let us go to venture capital investors, right? And that is because that's what's been originally or mostly available in the market. So you are a startup, there's a venture capital that would invest in me in exchange for equity. But now, I think with the way the world trade and geopolitics is shifting, it calls for more realistic or more fit for purpose solutions to our problems. So you have these startups that are solving niche problems sometimes that could not necessarily be fit for venture capital type of investment. So where do they go to? And this is where corporates now come in. And from where I see it, as we now start to see corporate venture capital models increasingly gaining momentum, I think we are looking at a point, we are looking at a situation where years down the line, I think the lines between traditional venture capital and corporate venture capital will sort of blur. And this is because as CVC comes up, then there's increasing need for collaboration between now the corporate venture capitals and the traditional venture capital type of investors. And the reason why I'm saying this is the two serve as two different type of investors who would complement each other. For example, venture capital is a kind of financing that is very high, like they have a very high appetite for risk, right? And so these would be the guys who would come in, serve as the investors who would give you patient capital to validate your business model, to build credibility, to help you even get your structures in place, as someone would put it, like, to get you to a point where you can now be able to attract more or larger ticket size of financing. On the other hand, when you look at corporate ventures, these are guys who are investing mainly following their broad organizational strategy, right? So if it's someone in automobile, for example, you'll find that perhaps their strategy would be to support startups along those lines, so they'll be looking at e-mobility and such. But even as they do that, I think there's also, to them, they also look at what value can we add beyond just investments, right? And if there's a need for them to innovate, I think they have the flexibility, aside from the broader organizational strategy, they have the flexibility to reinvent and to even restructure their strategies and their investment thesis to be able to meet the coming needs, industry needs, for example. But in order for this to be successful, I think the best scenario is where we have collaboration between the traditional kind of venture capital and the corporate venture capitals, because how I see it is venture capital will are best positioned to give you the smaller size kind of financing that you need. For example, a small ticket size of around $100,000 US. when you go to a corporate venture, for example, these are people who now they invest in you based on that alignment between what you are offering, and they've already identified that you are complementing what they do not have, and by investing in you, they are also gaining access to new markets. And for this startup, what you're getting from them is you're getting access to their established customer base that you do not have access to. So you're complementing each other, right? And you're both growing together. So I'd say when now you bring this higher risk for a higher appetite risk capital, which is traditional venture capital, blend it with now the corporate kind of venture capital, it will serve as not just spreading the risks, but also for these startups, it broadens your investor base that could potentially support your businesses.
Great. I think that's a very good way to look at it, where the corporate VCs kind of the risk and they nurture these ideas, and then at some point they will now to absorb the higher risk capital eventually, because they also have the traction that the VCs will be looking for. Now coming to Solomon. As we work within the same context of corporate VCs supporting these startups in terms of all kind of incubation programs, acceleration, and then doing the funding. One of the big challenges that you highlighted in your initial remarks was these guys want to go innovate, implement, then compliance and legal issues follow later. You know, we make laws for what I've already built as I go. You know, for the big companies, the corporates, they are like, we must abide by the law. We are visible. We have customers, and we need to protect whatever we are doing. It has to be stable and solid. We cannot do things that are not really regulated. We have to be compliant. How do you balance that? Because I think by the end of this session, we want to understand how do we solve for those kind of friction points. How do we ensure that as we work within this context of corporate startups collaborating or through the corporate VCs, whatever solutions that are coming up that do not fall under any regulation or that are yet to be regulated properly, that are very good for the corporate, can still be infused into the corporates. So that again the startup don't end up being kind of not of value add. So how do we solve for the compliance issue where startup is running too fast, doing things, regulation should come later, but the corporate is like, hold on, we can only take whatever is regulated, and there are friction analysis. How do we solve for that?
That's a very good question. I'm going to say, if you are a VC and a big corporate, I think you should see an opportunity in that. In the sense that, yes, you recognize that as a person who is visible to the society, you need to make a contribution to the wider economy by building these startups and scale-ups from the ground up. You also recognize that these startups will have limited resources that should be purely dedicated towards building and scaling that business. So what we've seen is that VCs, some accelerators, some P's are coming up with what we call technical assistance parts, just as a way of supporting these startups to achieve compliance while at the same time scaling their business. And that is in part driven by the fact that there is a recognition that if a VC is investing $100,000, for that founder, they already know that this $100,000 is going to be spent in a certain way. So really the wiggle room around which now to start addressing compliance issues well. So for these corporates, for the VCs, then we've seen it in normal jurisdictions where they say, look, beyond the investment they are making, they can have a separate pot of, let's say, $200,000. That $200,000 will be purpose will be to help you, engage somebody to help you with your processes, HR, legal, tax, governance. And so that burden that I would have become, not only by engaging technology, but any other person to assist you with some of those issues is limited. So that you primarily focus on as a business, but at the back of your mind, and this is very important, I have a peace of mind that the greatest extent possible. I have tried my best to make sure that this is try to follow what this is. So from a corporate point of view, then we also want to look at it from an ESG point of view. I'm saying as a corporate or as a team, I'm contributing towards economic sometimes. So that's something that can enhance the reputation that we see in your corporate as they continue to scale their businesses.
Great, so I think what I'm getting there is the technical systems now can come in to solve for the compliance issues. So that as much as we're working on developing the product or the solution that we need, we're also helping it to compliance, fall under the right regulations. I think the sample says that are things that we can be checking through. So by the time your solution is good and you're implementing it, we are working with a partner that is reliable. Back to Robert, you said that we should tell our stories. What are some of the successful corporate startup collaborations that we've seen in this country that have worked so well? And in your opinion, if you don't have hindsight information, why did they succeed? But if you have some background information as to why those kind of corporate and startup collaborations succeeded, why did they succeed? It's your opportunity now to do exactly what you told us. Tell us stories.
Okay, yeah, so I think just from what we've seen in the public, I think one interesting one that I've seen, I don't know the level of success, but the fact that if you ask me in the edtech space, I think that's an area where there's a big room for innovation, because you know how important education is, but globally, edtech has been a very tough space to innovate. It's one of those paradoxes in life. And you know, education is important, but probably payment is good and facilitates commerce tends to be getting all the demand because it's a simpler business model in terms of emergence. So I've seen MasterCard Foundation running some cohorts for startups. I've seen some big names there that are doing a lot. Just looking at Innovate, for example, I've seen them in MasterCard programs, but I've also seen them actually in Safaricom annual reports getting a mention of working together. So I think that's a good thing. That social proof is big. Things are doing the right thing, and we are in a good place to work with Safaricom, for example, because they have first party data, which is the data that you should be looking for. People are looking for data for social media, for segmentation. But let me tell you, that data is a customer that you have is a gold. So that's what actually, in my opinion, is the biggest difference between startups and corporates. Corporates basically have first-party data, and for us, we're still groping in the darkness, looking for users on TikTok, Instagram, hoping they'll be our customers. But once you have them and you're consuming their services, now you can do what you call layering, which is basically bringing in new services. It's the easiest thing, and that is what makes incumbents even more successful as they accumulate their advantages. So I think that's a good angle, because I actually believe that we should look for the most difficult problems to solve. And that's again a challenge to startups. If you're going into payment space and you need to menu, there's no you cannot be inspired in the same way. And the best ideas are those original and contextual ideas. I think, in my opinion, edtech is a big space. In the asset management space, you've seen CMA Sandbox, some of the startups that have come out there. Pesesha came with CMA Sandbox. We also choose, which helps you with saving. It came from CMA Sandbox, and now the partners are I think those are good things. Once you've been given a platform, then it's up to you, and of course, startups are trying to figure out what works. And then the big ones like Cellland, I think can share how they work, corporate, literally app, the practicing on. So certainly, if you look at what has worked in terms of corporate, usually have some bureaucracy, and they have so much going on, you can't really blame them. What is dear and important to you? They might have 1,000 dear and important things, and that's when they bring you in. And my definition of an IT is someone who can be trusted with outcomes. So if you are a startup that can be trusted with outcomes, then that thing is dear to a corporate, then you will find an opportunity. So they're looking for solutions, and they can't solve all of them, then they come in. So I think that is also something startups need to bring, that we just need to is something, I call them plug and play. Like even for us as a startup, we have two models, we have full-time employees and we have freelancers. So like over the December holidays, there's something set that you have to do. And I got the plug and play consultant by 10th of January was done. I was like, wow, you know. So if you are a startup and you can do that, we give you the corporate because there are so many things you want to achieve. Things are coming up like AI, you know, whatever you want to do, APIs, new areas of growth, and just seeing the best ways to help these corporates find the next growth opportunities. So I would say is key, in my opinion, to look at contextual innovation. Yeah, that is different from mega trends. That's what those startups are getting it wrong. The most successful innovations in Kenya are contextual, like Equity Bank and Tesla. You know, they are contextual. They are not brought by some basis from Silicon Valley to say that it is payment that is a trend. It is a problem that is solved and the solution that works. Then finally, for startups again, I would say you really need to know what the current economy is all about. Because one of the weaknesses of how we do our business in Kenya, we are using a state model of we all respond to the same RFP, you know, they end up having to work against us, you work and wait to get paid from government or any corporate. But the internet has brought a totally different economy that wasn't there before. It is aggregating value in ways that were not possible previously, that can connect to 10,000 people. So that's actually the thing you're going to incumbents for. So if you're innovating, start going into what we call expansive markets, the MSMEs. You know, there are about 5 to 7 million in Kenya. Households of 13 million households, you can segment and you have 100,000 that are your customers. And we have individual consumers. Like recently, just talking to young people, I found that there was a very interesting data set. I call them the young millennials or the zillennials. So young millennials, they're at the intersection of the old millennials and old Gen Zs. so you get it. So that age is very interesting. They have attributes of both segments. So can you figure out who they are, who will get a product, how many of them? So there are opportunities for startups to rise up in innovation and ensure that if innovation is creating something different, getting to the expansive market, which I believe is where we are leaving so much on the table. And the disadvantage of not getting into that from data, we were already losing some industries. Like you don't know how to innovate in the media space. Because of that, last year we took over 30 million to US tech company in terms of digital adverts, and less than 10% stayed here. What is happening? Media companies are shutting down, right? They are laying off people. So I would really want to challenge startups that the market is open for everyone. Attack. And who knows, you become the next incumbents or e-humans, whatever you call them. I've had that name 1,001 times. But really, I want people to be brave. Like, let's be brave so that we see that this problem is not even about the existing players. It's like identities at risk, like culture, norms, and stuff like that. Build communities. I like we don't need to build some communities. Is it called Jinkan? Wines? Yeah. And how corporates come. You see, those are success stories. Like we get a lot of press releases from corporates. The day I saw that Safaricom was supporting Solfest, and they're putting in 20 million pounds, like wow. No, we don't talk about those are success stories, you know. The Southeast Zone has what we call intangible asset, that Safaricom is looking for.
So what I'm getting from you is startups should context specific kind of innovation and trying to target demographics that ideally the incumbents may not have figured out how to deal with, and then you bring that value to the team. Current incumbents will be willing to collaborate.
I can give you a good example. Like the value for being contextual is that you really connect with people in a better way, because there are things that are global, like International Women's Day is global already. You didn't invent it, so everyone will go for it. But you should pick other way. Factually, I went to a school recently. On the price giving day, 90% of those who are receiving prizes were girls. Professor Kibuta Kibwana joined in a team for an accounting college graduation in Kilifi last year. 85% in that list were ladies. I saw a bank that started supporting boys. Yesterday they were at upper end boys. That's contextual. You see, that's how you become different. You'll never be different with a global thing. So startups that you're now an AI expert, it doesn't work that way. Yeah. If you go to places, you see real problems. That's actually how you come into the country. When you find a problem, it makes sense that if there's a gap in terms of the boy child and they need more support, the corporates will be the ones coming. But if you come with a team that is already global, everyone will celebrate it. So they're actually looking for Jacqueline to run speed. So there's no innovation you're going to bring. So really we need to go for contextual innovation. Like for us, for Pajani, we said we are going to do the operating system. We are sitting at the dinner table of the African family as a silent family member, listening to that daughter, her dreams and aspiration, the wife, the husband, irrespective of the structure of the family, and we are listening to them. If they want to go for holiday, can you help them to create that financial goal and be able to achieve it? And because of that, the corporates are seeing this is something we actually want to do. We want to make people wealthy because when we got independence, we started on the wrong footing. We were told to fight and eradicate poverty, which hasn't worked. We've been eradicating poverty forever. It has never gone. But at least if you create wealthy people, maybe they can inspire us to become wealthy. So I believe that contextual, like go to Murang'a town, see what solution needs you there. And Pesa started in Thika, and then all of a sudden people learned that it can work for the rest of Kenya. Then other African companies, contextual. So for me, the hero is the person who is brave enough to go contextual.
Excellent. And that then means you need to come up with new solutions, new ideas for specific market segments. You have known their demographics, these millennials, the kind of fashion they like, or the kind of preferences they have, and you've developed a solution for that. And then you take it to a corporate. And they didn't have that before. There's a fear from these young startups. Corporates are going to steal my idea. Yesterday I was working with some, I think around 24 startups. One of the things that came out was all about investment readiness. It had nothing to do with intellectual property. That question came up. How do I protect my innovation, my solution that we have developed from actually the investors, but in this context, from the investors still need, that's what they think, that this is our time to implement, this is a lie. But in this context, the corporate actually has the resources and the machinery to implement that solution and kick you out. And it's a big conversation in this town among startups. And this is a question now open to all of us. How do we deal with that issue of building trust between the startups and the corporates? I'll come up with an innovation, and we can have a good deal where I win and you win. There's a big market here, we have identified it, we have a solution that is contextual and that is working, that they buy in large numbers, and we all make money. How do we build that trust? And because there have been cases where people say, come and swear, so we pitched, we went through the acceleration program, or whatever program, and then we went to our idea. How do we solve that one and for all, so that now we have seamless operations going forward?
Given that I'm holding the mic, I was still just I was still thinking more about how Robert has spoken about contextualizing our solutions and your products, and it reminded me of a book that I read, 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel. I'd recommend for any startup founder to read. And he said that today's best practices lead to a dead end, and the best parts are the new and untried. So unless as a startup or companies are willing to invest in the difficult aspect of building and creating new ideas, then you're definitely going to fail, no matter how, in future you're definitely going to fail, no matter how profitable you may be at the moment. So that is a very good point. And also on telling our stories, there's also another aspect to it on how do you package your stories differently to different audiences. Because the same way you present yourself or you pitch to a traditional venture capital investor will not necessarily be the same way that you will approach a corporate venture, for example, and pitch the idea in the same way and win their hearts. So there's also that understanding of it's not one size fits all. So you need to also be able to keep adapting to different situations, different environments, and also just tweaking your conversations based on what level of what level of relationship are we at. There may be cases where you, first of all, for you to be able to get someone to hear you out or to listen to your story or to buy into your story, you need to first of all start by building that relationship from ground zero. Now back to your question on building trust. That is a very complicated, it's a very complicated element, because I know for some people, and especially now this is on the startup side, they will assume that having an MBA in place, for example, is a good starting point. And then now you can start approaching investors, but you already have locked your mind to, without an MBA, I'm not going to disclose my product, I'm not going to discuss this with you. And then you're met with an investor who really does not have the time to explain to you that I do not have the capacity to implement or to execute your product. What I do have right now is hundreds of more, almost similar people approaching me with an almost similar solution that I need to listen to and weigh out and decide who amongst these people are really cut out for position for success. How do you competitively stand out when it comes to competitive advantage? And so, on that note, I would say there's also a huge role for the ecosystem, and I'm talking about ecosystem enablers, ecosystem builders, such as IAFCA, where we sit at the intermediary of both the investor side and the investee side, also public and private. So the entrepreneur support organizations, it calls for us all to figure out how to serve as intermediaries to foster such kind of partnerships, but also knowledge creation and awareness. So creating platforms where you can have open conversations, you can hear from both sides of the table, so that you're demystifying some of the unknown fears that exist between both the startups or the businesses that are seeking financing and the investors who are willing to invest. But you realize there's just a misalignment in terms of interpretation of some items, there's a misalignment in terms of expectations even. So bridging such gaps and continuously investing in knowledge creation and awareness. Networking is one of the greatest ways to do this, because in many networking events, you tend to interact with people in more informal setups, and so use such opportunities to really probe. Also do your background checks, do your due diligence. So don't just approach any type of investors, because you're most likely going to be met with not so much suitable response, right? So when you have opportunities for networking where people are interacting in a more informal setup, you're not just building the relationship, but you also have a chance to now really understand whether or not you are aligned. So understanding, first of all, whether or not there's alignment between your product, your solution, and what these investors are investing in is also another great way to look at it in terms of building trust. There's also the legal way when it comes to now IP protection, but I must admit that I'm not a legal expert, but I know there's the legal way to go about it, IP and the other trademarks, so IPs and trademarks. That's also another legal way to look at it. But even beyond that, for businesses, There's also a cultural or a social nuance, and for many of us who've gone through the 844 system, where you start a business and then you are so passionate about it that you become overprotective, that you will not even be willing to invest more into that business, for example, by employing or rather leveraging services of a professional. It may come at a cost, which understandably, if you're starting out and you do not have the finances to meet this cost, it seems as an unwanted expense. But years down the line, you come to realize the value of also investing in professionals. And this is beyond having your board of advisors, beyond having your board of directors, having a professional who will help you to interpret, help you to even structure your communication, to go through your presentation before you start going around and talking to everyone. And then by the time you realize you need a professional service, you're already very deep into the situation that now it costs you even more. So having that mindset shift, that be more flexible, be more willing, it's painful to think about it as someone who's building a business from scratch and you need financing and you need all that support, but it's also very important to look at it as an investment into the business, that you're working with professionals who are now better placed to guide you.
Thank you. I'll go to Solomon on points. Building on what Jack has shared, before I get more invested in the trust, try to protect your IP, but still, in go legal, big corporate has all the time, it has a legal department, but it has all the time to the courts. I'm a startup, I need to be my customers in my name. So any day that I'm going to court is a waste of day. So I lose the battle. You go legal that they've stolen my idea or they've taken my solutions and they're implementing them going forward. How do we, and I think this is a Kofi Annan kind of, how do we build this a situation where we agree to collaborate and not cannibalize each other? I know I'm big, I can listen to the idea, I have the ideas, develop it, move on, and we do nothing to it because we go to court, the cost will be too high, we can drag it over 3-10 years. So how do we build rapport between these issues around scaling of ideas? Actually, does it happen? Maybe it does, which the answer to for most startups would be yes, it happens. How do we do it?
Thank you, Jeremy, for that question. I think Jackie has probably and I usually say the foundation of trust is communication. We have this saying that it does not exist. So, for me, the way I look at it is, from a startup point of view, that knowledge is very important. I know somewhere in the Bible, remember these people say, "Faith that best of friend." So I suppose you think that people learn from the lack of knowledge. So you might not have that knowledge of starting to show and knowledge building becomes very important. Legal is not a by it is integral to the business. So if I'm looking to collaborate with corporate in building a product, then I should be able to leverage the synergies and expertise that corporate has. It may look like very theoretical, but it's a conversation we're having. Look, I have this product to build. This is how I think it would fit to be in the context that Robert was just talking about. Probably for you, I want to take a business, I will do it. So instead of us cannibalizing each other, how can we come up with a model that can move our businesses? Can I do a revenue sheet? Can I scale that? So as if we have the internet, so how can I leverage on the existing tools that I have to just scale whatever I've created myself? And I think that's the model that I had somewhere that said software services is moving.
Having to agree on the terms of engagement and documenting that so that everyone now is protected. And then bring Robert into this conversation by giving an example that has been in the headlines of late season. World Bank comes, pays for a product to be developed. Some companies do that work to do, they are paid to develop, they have to do 10 solutions, services, Now there are tens of thousands, like 90,000, 20,000 services on the platform. The guys still are there. The government says yours was for a short period of time to develop for 10. They are like, we're still providing support for 19,000, so fair to play. And it appears like the contract is in play. I know that may be having some political things behind it that are beyond the obvious, but I just want to draw this conversation. We've discussed a lot around the corporates. I want to draw this conversation towards the side when it comes to governance. Again, we have a lot of challenges in a lot of service delivery from the public sector. And these startups, whether it is healthcare, education, college, they can come and provide solutions to account together. So that the service delivery to humanity is more efficient, more streamlined. Looking at the easy registration, good money is a good startup that is making good money, but it's a lot of these back and forth between the government and them. How do we create structures or systems through which now our startups can also again working with the government, providing solutions that are innovative, that are looking for efficiency, effectiveness, and service delivery, but also not end up with the system that we call what should we do?
Great question and a difficult one. So I think I usually say that in my opinion, the tech community kind of needs to do more. I think they're all over and easily excited by new things, and that's why we're never getting ahead. Because for me, my approach to civilization is usually you build layers. And that's why if you go to any company that you admire, you find they're very big on agriculture. I get it. But here in Kenya, if the internet comes to AI, now you don't want to do agriculture and you import food. You end up earning a lot of money and raising all of it in food. Because your approach to civilization is wrong, it's about being excited and being stuff. So I think the tech community, whoever thinks they are leader in tech, and those who went to school to do tech like myself, we need to take charge and now start shaping conversation. Because like forever, I wasn't really excited about Kenya tech ecosystem, because it is common knowledge that most of the ideas that we have and what we call tech, they've largely been born from Silicon Valley. So to see how Silicon Valley was built, it was we had 3 legs, there was academia, right? There was private sector and public sector, and they also like, you will always find Google doing something, Stanford, Facebook, it works seamlessly. So to see that the other country that have done something similar, I think if you go to China, Shenzhen, they've done that. But forever we were not doing that. We were meeting in small places and then saying a Silicon Savannah. But for once, I've seen Konza. I think the idea is great. The fact that they're bringing academia, bringing corporates and government in charge. I think we also need to grow beyond our selfish gains and just give it goodwill. Because with that foundation, I will have all these structures. And in my opinion, it's the best idea that if we support, if you are really innovating, we need to support it. Then we come up with structures whereby awareness is big. Because in Kenya, awareness is a problem. We just come up with financial products, we don't care whether people know how to use them. We just assume they know where the buttons are, we explain videos, and see stuff like that. Yet, for software like Google and Microsoft, they're so big in education. My career, I learned so much about Oracle, everything was through on their website. If you go to a corporate review, you really recommend Oracle because that is what you learn. That's how the companies go through education. So let's go beyond awareness so that you understand all these structures, like what are contracts like, what are the different monetization models for techs. I like reading books on monetization, and you get to know that things like SaaS, like before you get into a contract. And the challenge that you get as SMEs or startups in Kenya, as long as you don't have an expansive market product where you are running and serving households by yourself, consumer goods or SMEs, you'll always be blown away by contracts from corporates and governments. So you see that tenders for 50 million stock taking is a big blind spot. And that's how, for example, a certain supermarket, people are supplying and they knew they're not going to pay, and they didn't pay about 15 million was there because everyone just rushes. I'm supplying service, so it's a big deal. So we forget to learn the intricates, people think about the financial situation, people don't look at it. As long as I'm supplying the government, I know I'm paid. And here comes the 500 billion benefits. As long as I'm working the government with the tenders this much, having worked there, I've seen much bigger tenders, and I know how the story ended. So it's just a matter of education, and then have a stand. Let's be men of purpose and women of purpose, meaning that you have an opinion. Because these days are here, people saying with emotional intelligence, everyone can be anything they want. But unlike a woman or a man who is biased, at least they have an opinion on something. Such that if the deal comes, you can say no to it. Then move to what you want. Rather than signing it, then I won't say no, it is my right, it is the constitution. So people really need to have upfront, like be very clear in terms of what you want. But the people who really need to do a lot of work is the tech community, empower people. Like all of us have access to social media, that one I call it tech literacy. But in terms of tech competency, can you build on how you approach structures, negotiations? If it is payments, there are different monetization models. If it is working with the government, who is going to own the IP upfront? So I think if we are empowered, we have a better outcome. But it also goes to the software. The software is always culture. We trust each other, stuff like that, which is a little more complicated. But I would just like the tech ecosystem. For once, take leadership. Say that for the next 10 years, this is what you are focusing on, even for 1 year. And have ways of building ideas. Like if it is AI, let's create a focus group that is working with that, then trust. That's the influence in that ecosystem. If everyone is an expert on AI, you are basically doing nothing. The areas they've studied, they have Senate committees and stuff like that, and give them big budgets and give startups incentives. Self-driving cars, Tesla got a lot of incentives. So that means that you've seen this thing is important and this is the focus you're giving it. Rather than if it becomes a pragmatic area where you're saying the fit is self-driving cars and you're doing nothing about it. The fit is there, I'm sick and tired of side things. Can we just say, let's trust Jeremy, Solomon, and Jack and the team to just work on this and bring the brightest mind to focus on that. The rest can focus on agriculture. That will have more quality in terms of what farmers get. And then we avoid these areas of value areas like great areas. We are already into the marriage and we don't know how to get into it. We don't know how to get out of it. So those are the kind of deals that come out if there's more clarity.
I think Solomon wants to add something on that very point.
Yes, I think that's my experience. And education, when I do education here, education all the way from primary or universities. We know universities are primarily research institutions, and the primary objective is for you to come up with research that solves a particular problem. The question I think we need to ask ourselves as Kuawe is, to what extent does the culture in universities encourage the solving of pertinent problems that we have? I can give an example. I was doing research the other day and I realized the ChatGPTs that we are using is based on a research paper that was done by Google in 2018. So there's a certain model they use to come up with that, what we call a large language model. Research. So the more we encourage, or maybe the way we change mindsets around how we view research and how we view education, then I think that really supports our process for solving a problem that is contextual to the place we live.
I think what I'm getting here as we bring Janet on to tell us, can we trust government? The solution is the government by itself first needs to be like organized and structured. These are the priority areas that we want to develop as an economy, contextual kind of innovation like you said. And then the tech side of which the tech is also not to be all over and moving with the trend that is coming from outside the waves, but be like, this is our country, this is what the country wants, this is what the country wants to do, so let's bring those focus groups to focus on delivering for that. And of course, a bit of government support from the other end, from a policy point of view, and also providing guidance that prioritize these things because they're important for our country. You know, like the US, they passed that act that was trying to protect these new technologies, and they call it Climate Act. But she had nothing to do with climate, just putting China outside of the US, you know. And they know this is a priority area, we want to be leaders in AI, and they focus the energies there, and then they start to get innovation of that space. Assuming we do that, the structured government, we want to prioritize this. The technical system, they have come together, they have said, okay, we're going to support you as a government, and they're developing solutions. How do we not end up like the struggle of e-citizen, where now the money is there, the solution is working, but you are fighting? Can we trust the government?
That's a heavy question. I feel like throwing it back to the audience on the right note. But even before we come to governments, the other thing, just building on research and industry, I think one other thing that's missing in our ecosystem is lack of partnership also between the industry and academic institutions, especially when it comes to research, for example. I've seen a few universities who try and incorporate some practical industry case studies into their modules, and I think it's a very good thing. I've not seen so many people doing that. When I saw it, I honestly wished I would have been fortunate to go through such a model of learning where there's more collaboration between the academic institutions and the industry, because then what ends up being as a result of this misalignment is you have academic institutions churning out graduates who are not ready for the real job market. And then you have these employers who are very apprehensive about, hiring these graduates because of the fear of, the amount of investment that it will take. And I've had a lot of stories around these and some institutions where, some employers, because they offer very niche areas of studies, and some employers are only, are sort of blacklisted that don't take graduates from this school unless you're willing to train them again from scratch, and they need about 1 year to 2 years for them to adapt to the real world job market. So I think that's also very important. And also, if we figure out how to commercialize this research, I think it's a very great incentive for the researcher themselves and even for the ecosystem at large. Back to the big question, elephant in the room: do we trust the government?
You can't trust corporates.
I don't think the government has 100% trust from most of the citizens, myself included, and this is based on how we see issues being conducted, how they carry themselves out. The bureaucracy in government is more stifling than enabling. We've talked about, corporates where you have an example of a successful partnership, and you have one department following up on where are you at on the progress, but the money has not been released from the finance department. And I think there's more cases of that in government where there's delays as opposed to how can we fast track this. In terms of also the support that government can offer, and even just looking at accounting, for example, I think they are in a very central position where they could serve as intermediaries between public-private partnership. So they could be the ones to drive, meaningful partnerships where they bring in the private sector as well as the public sector to support the startup economy. When you look at the amount of time it takes to have policy formulation and implementation, for example. And there's also an element of capacity issues for the policy makers. Yeah? So it takes a lot of time, and they need a lot of training to even understand the industries. And as we all know, regulation always catches up to innovation. So the rate at which we are innovating does not really reflect the rate at which government is stepping up to come up with enabling policies, to come up with incentives even. I was surprised earlier this year, I met a startup who, and it's not a first-time startup founder, they've done business in Kenya before their first startup was started as, when they were students at KU, and they sold it, and it was a successful exit for them. And then when now going into the next startup, they've suddenly relocated out of Kenya, and they've gone to Botswana. Why? Because in Botswana, the government was like, this is the programs we are coming up to support the government. For one, we'll give you capital grant financing to get you off the ground, but beyond that, we are giving you tax breaks on corporate tax. I think it's about 3 years or about 5 years, they're about tax break. And these are things that we don't see in Kenya. When it comes to licensing, that is another hurdle. You need, sometimes you need $1 million in one license, okay, using that figuratively, but you need a license for your corporate business, you need a license, a separate license for advertising. So the question is, how can we have a more unified system where, as I'm doing my business registration, why can that, and I really like that now we have eCitizen, which is now trying to digitize government services and all that, but there's still, I believe there's still a lot more work that can be done to, first of all, remove the duplication of efforts when it comes to some services that can easily be collapsed into one. So when you're doing a business registration, you only need to, for example, identify what sort of sector, industry, what sort of licensing do you need, how can I just access that information in one place and pay the required fees based on my industry or my sector. But I don't have to necessarily keep running from one office to the other, trying to acquire different licensing, because it just takes away from your time that you would have been spending on more core business operational activities. So on that front, I don't think there's a lot of confidence in government when it comes to its level of support for the startup ecosystem and even just supporting innovation.
Thank you very much. And I think you just summarized it for the government. If we proceed with the conversation, if we continue the conversation on government, we might touch on taxes, which is emotive. So we'll stop the government discussion with that. And just allow my panelists now to give me your closing and the closing remarks on this whole discussion around the startup and corporates collaborating in partnerships and working together. What's that one thing that we know it, forget about the government, it's emotive. Let's come to the corporates. What's that one thing or two things that you would recommend that if these things are done and done well, then we are going to see more collaborations, and the collaborations are going to be mutually beneficial, and overall now the whole ecosystem benefits. The corporates benefit, the startup benefit, the economy benefits. What are the two key takeaways that you would like to recommend? Having this kind of bad thing that the problems we have, what are the solutions that will come in certain problems?
Okay, I've learned that in today's world, a biased person usually is more truthful than someone who is not biased. So I'm going to be biased. So what I would say is that for startups, really, you need depth in terms of the problem that you are solving. So I can tell you, like, for example, in our space where we operate as a Botany, Kenya has gotten a lot of awards. We've been told we are financially included, 84%. But if you look at financial health, these are some of the statistics. Financial health in Kenya is less than 20%. Okay? So it means those are people who can, when you talk about money, they feel okay. They're not worried, they can be able to pay bills and take care of themselves. So it means that there's an opportunity to move it, let's say, from 18% to 19%. You get it? To 21% to 30%. It is a bigger problem to solve than all trying to get to where we're already at 84%. So let's look at those difficult problems to solve. When we get to the retirement age, currently data from RBA shows that about only 14% to 12% have enough by the time they retire. You get it? Yeah, but we rarely find pension kind of fitted innovation and stuff like that. We're all going to payments and digital loans, which digital loans is no longer a problem in Kenya. If I go to the internet, I can get 20 or 50 apps. So let's have the courage to look at really big problems with big payoffs. So that kind of connection also makes the conversations exciting. When we go to corporate, we find these are difficult problems and we bring a solution. Rather than coming up with a solution where there are 20 people like you. So that's actually what is lowering the bargaining power of small businesses and even startups. If you have low bargaining power, what will happen? People will pay you when they want. But if you are solving a really big problem, I think they'll overdo themselves. And that's something we need to look at as startups. The second thing, to anyone doing business in Kenya, I insist that you're using a stable business model of working, then praying for payment. You work, then you pray, and hope you never be paid. So I'm encouraging everyone, let's take advantage of the demographics nuances into large markets. We talk big that you have 16 million people, 12 million people on TikTok. How many of them can you convert using prepaid revenue models? So that's something probably we've solved for ourselves like a journey that currently our prepaid revenue models are able to cover our monthly OPEX, such that if the payments from corporates today, at least you can still keep going. The 2 months where Gen Zs had issued with the government, we had the toughest time. But what kept us going on was prepaid revenue models. So we are not all going to be waiting for, these are receivables markets. Everyone's balance sheet is full of money that they've worked for and they're waiting to get paid. So if you're really innovating, forget about AI and everything. Innovate in how we think about finance. That's a bright spot for the whole country. Government calls people over 500 billion. Any SMEs you meet and small businesses, including myself, startups, they're all managed by someone. Yet you pay managers upfront, you pay Netflix upfront, you pay YouTube premium upfront, and you claim that Kenyans cannot pay for subscription. Do you listen to ourselves? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jackie.
Yeah, this is my favorite part of the conversation, and I know we talked about challenges, we talked about problems, but we've also looked at solutions and opportunities. And I like to say that it's not all gloom. There's success stories. Let's try and emulate and see how they've done it, what lessons they've learned, so that we are not making the same mistakes. And that is where mentorship comes in. Embracing mentorship, collaboration. I'll keep insisting on collaboration, collaborate. But also, let's continue having open conversations on issues that require intervention. And in line with that, let's also try and make sure that we are involving and looping in the right people into these conversations, the decision makers. When we talk about policy, for example, who do we want to, come in, and what is our call to action to them? So having that clarity in terms of the direction that we want to shape in terms of building this industry, I think is very important. But most importantly, entrepreneurship is hard, but also it calls for a lot of resilience. So let's also build on our resilience. Let's observe and learn, but let's not forget the reason as to why we are doing it and what your motivation for doing it is. Because at the end of the day, when it's all done and you're all by yourself, and you're trying to answer the question that Robert has just put across, like, what are you really solving? Is it really needed, or is it just a problem in your head? So having that clarity of purpose is also very important.
Thank you so much.
We are just saying knowledge is key. Trust will become the bedrock for a successful business and basis of collaboration amongst the various stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That has been our time. Thank you for joining this session on the startup corporate dealroom. The conversation is big, is wide. There are a lot of things to be discussed. There are a lot of nuances to dive into. So I think my panelists introduce themselves. You can find all of them on LinkedIn. You can follow them, you can have conversation with them. After this, you can network with them and get to learn more about some of the points that they raised that you feel you want to give input to. Thank you for being a good at this, and we hope you continue learning as we continue with Innovate Kenya Summit. Have a good day.